So my name's Peter. I first started paying attention to resilience about 10 years ago, working as an environmental campaigner, noticing the first signs of burnout in myself and those around me. You know, working long hours, never really switching off, little sense of progress. And at the time, it kind of felt like just the price you pay for doing something that you believe in. You know, want to make a difference? Okay, then it comes at a cost. And thankfully, we've come a really long way since then. But not all of the progress has been positive. So I'm going to talk to you this evening about everything I've learned about resilience in the last 10 years and how the way our society talks about and frames resilience can actually make it significantly harder for us to achieve. I'm also going to talk about how in the many workshops I've done with activists, communities, businesses, organizations, again and again, the single biggest barrier to our ability to prioritize our own resilience is this idea of the myth of doing nothing. So, most of us have quite a different relationship with the idea of resilience than we did a couple of years ago, right? When we think tomorrow is going to be the same as today, resilience kind of feels like this abstract crisis response, you know, something we turn to only when things are bad. But as the world around us changes, you know, really rapidly and things become more uncertain, we start to realize that actually resilience is something we have a constant and ongoing relationship with. Put more poetically, resilience is not putting on a coat when it starts to rain. Resilience is having the coat in the first place, whether it rains or not. And this is quite similar to my experience of talking to people about burnout as well. When I talk to people about burnout, they often describe it as a binary experience, you know, on or off. You're either burnt out or you're not. And it's only when you are burnt out that you pay attention to it. I just did a Google image search for burnout, and I kid you not, I mean, it's like there was some weird meeting between all of the designers about what burnout means, and they all designed these ideas. But it is, we think about it like this, you know, we don't look at it until our green battery goes to red, and only then do we start to pay attention to it. But this is not what burnout is. The very little research there is into the idea of burnout suggests that this is not the case. So in 2019, the World Health Organization finally developed a formal classification for burnout. This is what they say. Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Okay, so this is the most formal definition of burnout that exists in the world. I mean, it's ludicrous. What does that mean? It's incredibly vague. Not successfully managed. How do I know what that means when that applies to me? What's a workplace? How do we define that? Burnout is not a fixed idea. It's an extremely subjective experience. And this is also reflected in some of the most influential research into burnout that I've ever come across, which is the 12 stages of burnout by Freudenberger and North. So this is some research into how people experience burnout, or how they can, and it's a sort of a linear process, which I'll explain to you. So people might experience these stages differently or in a different order, but it always starts with this idea of a desire to prove yourself. Okay, so this is something we've all got to one degree or another. Okay, a sense of who we are. We've also got a sense of who we think we should be, or who we want to be, or who we think other people think we should be. And when those ideas are closely aligned, you know, that's fine, happy days. When there's a gap between those two ideas, then that creates a tension. And a tension we want to fill. So what happens is we start to work harder, putting more of our energy into who we want to be. We start to change our needs, our values. We start to deny there's a problem, withdraw from others, and eventually our behavior change will become obvious to other people. So the stages don't end here. They go on a little bit further, and it gets a bit heavy after this. We have some words like depersonalization, inner emptiness, depression, burnout syndrome. So here, you know, it's very much getting into the realm of mental health conditions. And I'll quote directly from the last point, burnout syndrome. What they say about this is they say patients who reach this stage require urgent and immediate medical attention. And there's a couple of problems with this. One is it's pretty obvious by that point that we need attention, right? Our bodies are shutting down, our brains are shutting down, we can't get out of bed in the morning. This is not when we need attention. This is when we need attention. And also another aspect of this is, thankfully, most people who experience these things won't get to this point. But that doesn't mean that these are things that we should just put up with. But they're really hard to notice. The thing about down here is we know we require medical attention because it's become that binary thing. Our battery is down to the red. So we need to develop new ways of understanding when we're at risk, when we're up here. And to do that, we need to start thinking about it as patterns. So in the workshops I've been doing, I noticed if I change it just by adding in one arrow, it can help get a slightly different idea of what this might mean. Because when we get to this stage and our behavior change is obvious to someone else, it doesn't necessarily trigger these ideas, but what it can do is start the process all over again, because we think even more that people think we're not being who we're supposed to be or who they expect us to be. So that desire to prove ourselves kicks in straight away. And this is how most people experience burnout, as somewhere on this journey, somewhere on this cycle. But again, it's really hard to notice it if we're not queued up for looking at patterns and noticing how we're feeling at any one time without having to wait till we're forced to do it because we can't get out of bed. And it's very similar with resilience. Resilience, again, is all about patterns. And resilience is an idea that there's a lot more attention on now than there was a few years ago, and that's fantastic. It's really good to see more attention paid to a crucial part of our health and well-being. But the flip side of that is when something becomes popular, people start to sell it. And when people sell something, they tend to put it in a box. And this is the box that resilience is sold in. Something you can get by following these 5 steps, or these 7 steps, or these 20 steps, or surely some number of steps is going to give us resilience. And we know this doesn't work. If this worked, we'd be doing these things all the time. I wouldn't be here, but we're not. There's a reason that this is difficult. There's a reason that resilience is a multi-billion-pound industry worldwide. And there's a reason that you can't get resilience by following an article that takes you 5 minutes to read. And the reason is this. Knowing what resilience is very different to being able to prioritize it. It's not to say that there's nothing useful in any of these ideas, but they're only part of the story. And again, it's all about patterns, the same patterns that can drive us towards burnout or lead us away from it. Now, to talk a bit more about, where does resilience come from? And how do we do it? How do we find those patterns? I want to walk through an exercise that I use in my workshops called the resilience tree. And if it's something that resonates with you, I'd really recommend you take it away and you do it in your own time, on your own with other people. But this is really a tool to help us think about, what's going on for us? When we're practicing resilience, when we are being resilient, what's actually happening to us in our bodies, in our minds? And we start down here at the bottom with the roots. So the roots of resilience. What is it that gives you resilience? What is it that keeps you resilient? So I'm going to share some examples I've been given over the years, and I invite you to think whether they connect with you or whether actually you replace them with something else entirely. So some examples here. Going for a walk, having a sense of belonging, spending time with friends, faith, health, good food, sleep. Some of these are pretty universal. Some of these are highly subjective. There's no wrong answers here, but there are different answers. And the key thing for this is we need a balance of the two. So on the left, I've got ideas that by and large you can go out and do, right? I mean, if I told you tomorrow, I want you to all go for a walk, I want you to spend time with friends. Yes, there might be some barriers from time to time, but generally these are things you can do. But they're not necessarily things you can immediately see the benefit of. What happens when you do those things? On the right, however, these are things that are maybe hard to actualize. If I said tomorrow, go and have a sense of belonging, you probably wouldn't exactly know how to do that. I mean, if you do, great. But these are often things that are harder to actually create. But they're things that we believe are important. If faith is something that's important to us, we generally know why that is and how that is positive. Health is something that's really, it's easy to see why health is a priority for us. So we need both. Because if we just have the ideas on the right, we end up with, some vague, floaty ideas that we don't know what to do with. But if we just have the ideas on the left, we're just left with another to-do list, right, that we're probably never going to get done. So we need a balance. And once we've got that balance, then we start looking at the fruits of resilience. So the question here is, what does resilience give you? What is the benefit of resilience? And this is sometimes a harder question to answer. It's not one we're generally asked a lot of the time. So again, I'm going to share some examples that I've been given. And again, think whether these are the same for you, whether you'd add other ones or different ones. Happiness, popularity, creativity, open-mindedness, All sorts of ideas here. Again, no wrong answers, but again, there are different answers. So on the left, these are ideas that we have a really intrinsic connection to, right? They really speak to who we want to be as people. So I said here, okay, I'm giving out happiness. Who would like some happiness? I'd be very surprised if anyone said, actually, I'm probably all right for happiness. Thanks, though. Fair play if you do. But we don't really know what that necessarily means. If I said, okay, well, I'm going to sell you some happiness. So to get that happiness, you have to give me some money or some time. Then it becomes a very different question. How do we actually value that? Because happiness, like resilience, it's one of those words that you think, yeah, I want some of that, but I don't really know what it is or what it means or how it impacts me. It's very difficult to do that. And if we don't know how to value something or how important it is to us or what it means, it's very hard to prioritize. On the right, however, we've got ideas that are maybe less, deeply connected to who we want to be, but are drivers of behavior, right? I mean, we'll do something if it makes us more popular. We'll do something if it gives us health or makes us more productive. So again, we need a balance. We need these really deep connected ideas of who we want to be, and we need these things that drive our behavior. And when we've got both of those things, then this is the resilience tree complete. This is the pattern. This is the cycle. Because what we can do now is we can start drawing connections between our roots and our fruits. Not to, oversimplify and say, okay, great, if I go for a walk, I'm definitely going to be more popular. It's not as simple as that, and we don't want to patronize ourselves. But the key thing here is it's not about knowing exactly what the consequence of going for a walk is. It's believing that there is a consequence. This is the pattern that we need to develop. This is the key to resilience, I think. And this is where we come back to our old friend, the myth of doing nothing. Because I want you to think about a time when you've wanted to do one of your routes, something that is important for you, and you've wanted to do that, but you haven't done it. You've done something else instead. And think about what that other thing was. I'd hazard a guess that it was probably something that had external feedback from someone else. So maybe you went on social media with the constant and immediate feedback that gives, or maybe you sent that email that you've been meaning to send that someone's been waiting for and they're going to respond to. Or maybe it was a domestic duty, keeping a family member warm and fed. We are constantly conditioned to seek out external feedback. Our brains are literally wired to want it, to look for it, to be ready to receive it. And this becomes a real problem when we need to do something that doesn't generate external feedback from other people. When we do something where the feedback is internal or invisible. Because there's always going to be something else that seems more important because it gives us that external feedback. And this is where, when we talk about these ideas, we tend to use this language of doing nothing, right? Okay, what are you doing? Oh, nothing, I'm just going for a walk. And it's illogical, right? I mean, there's no such thing as doing nothing, and we know that. What we mean is we're doing nothing of consequence. But again, that doesn't make any sense. Everything we do has consequence. What we mean when we say we're doing nothing is we're doing nothing of consequence to other people. And forget for a minute that that's totally wrong. Obviously, if you do these things and get these things, that's going to have an impact on those around you. The point is, that shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter that we do things that don't have external consequence to other people or don't seem to, or that the consequence to ourselves is the most important part of it. But it's really hard. It's really hard to prioritize those things because there'll always be something else where we know we're going to get feedback from someone. So to prioritize something where the feedback is something we have to give ourselves becomes very difficult. But it's hard, but it's like a muscle. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. And this is what we need. We need a balance of these things. We need this pattern because we practice it and we see the results. If we just have the list, we don't see the impact. So the myth of doing nothing, while this is doing its magic, all of these messages will just make us feel worse. Because we know what we need to do. We know what makes us well, but we can't do it for some reason. And it makes us feel like it's our fault or we've done something wrong or we're not doing it properly. But this is not all that resilience is. Resilience is not just a crisis response. It's not just something we turn to when things are difficult. It's as much about what we do when things are going well. It's about the patterns that keep us well. It's about believing that these behaviors will get us closer to who we want to be. These are the patterns we need to practice. This is the belief we need to get to. And it is difficult because just like a raincoat, we don't notice the benefit of a raincoat when it's not raining. And we don't notice the benefit of resilience when we're not in a bad place. But it is there. It's there all the time. And as anyone who lives in Cornwall will know, the rain is not exactly predictable. It comes and goes in an instant. So having an unused raincoat is not a sign that we're waiting for the bad times. It's a sign that we're ready for them, should they come. Thank you.